Hey, this is Matterall from Talking in Stations. I am here with Puppet Master. Is that what it is?
MuppetHunter.
Muppet Hunter. Okay, Muppet Hunter. I'm thinking of Metallica. That's a different show. He is the lead. He is the game design director for CCP, and we're really happy to talk with him because he is relatively new to CCP. How are you doing?
Pretty good, thank you. I've been here since January.
January. Okay. This is the first time I heard of you was in the minutes, and we looked at that title and we thought, why don't we know about this person? Because a lot of players tend to look at EVE Online and think about all the game design patterns that are happening so they can predict how to react and all that kind of stuff. So your role made everybody curious about who you were because you were somebody that could influence the design of the game or the development of the game. But before we get to all that, let's talk about you and what's your experience and what's your background?
Okay, I've been a game designer for far too long. I spent about 9 or 10 years in pen and paper games. I did Legend of the Five Rings, the card game, and the role-playing game. I've worked on a few LARPs. I've done board games. I've been in computer games for about 12 years now, although I occasionally do side projects back into the pen and paper realm. Recently I've done, or a few years ago, I did work on one of the Vampire the Masquerade games.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Familiar with that.
Yeah, a CCP has touched on it once or twice.
And now that you're in Iceland and you're living there, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's very nice.
You like it?
Oh, it's wonderful, yeah. You need jackets. Jackets are good.
Okay.
It's great.
Yeah, well, if I make it to FanFest, I'll remember to bring that.
You should come.
So inside of CCP, you work directly with game designers?
Yeah, so a design director, I check in with the game designers as often as I can. I tend to go to a lot of meetings. I have a lot to say about the design process and how things function, but I'm not expected to be an expert. Like the individual designers on teams are the experts. So for example, I might ask someone like Steve to create a new cruiser. But if Steve gets in an argument with me about exactly what the stats of that cruiser are, I would be a fool to try to overrule him because he has a lot more institutional knowledge in that category. And so I don't, obviously. But we also generally don't get in fights. It's a pretty amicable place, yeah.
Yeah, so Steve is CCP Rise, for those that don't know him. They all talk to each other in real names.
Yes.
We talk about them in fictional names. But okay, so you're managing the process, and what can you tell us about the direction of EVE Online today, and what kinds of I guess theories you guys are working with or practices, that sort of thing?
Okay. So about a year and a half or so ago, the strategy guys, this people on the C-level and in that area, decided that they wanted to push the company to grow, to become bigger, and to be a little bit more industry standard, but still EVE. No company can just adopt a model that some other company created and not customize it. But we are moving in that direction. And that means that we are doing things like currently we have a lot of systems in EVE, obviously, that have been developed over 16 to 20 years. And so we're exploring ideas like how do we take these systems and without changing the experience that players get, how do we make the back end of them similar or the same so that it's easier for us to work on them, which would allow us to basically multiply our effort. So same number of people would be able to produce more content quicker. So we're doing a lot of things like that. We're also looking at some structural changes like how exactly do teams function? Is this the most efficient way that things could be rolling? We are taking a look at the way we release information about EVE. One of the mandates that Hilmar has passed down, mandate is not quite the word. It was a discussion, everyone agreed it's a good idea. Yeah. But we are trying not to talk about our product so far in advance. Like in the past, we have made announcements a year before we plan to release something. And sometimes it gets canceled in the meantime, or sometimes it's not as we envisioned it. And so what we're trying to do is take a step back and talk about things that are coming out in the next month and things that we have more confident in exactly what they're going to be, so that when we discuss details, we'll be spot on. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're closer to reality because you have a lot of it accomplished already.
Yeah, closer to building a expectation that when we say something, you should start spending your in-game currency to prepare for it.
Okay, so that's one of the things that I've heard a lot of people say in the past. They have felt like let down. Not a lot of people, but some people. And so they first complained about things being overpromised and not delivered. And now there seems to be the reverse, which is I need a pathway. Like I need to know where the game's going. CCP, give me that sort of thing.
Well, that is the natural problem that's arising. We've been thinking about things too far in advance, and because of that, we dropped the ball. It's not quite the right way to say it, but like the reality is, once you start working on a project, it's never exactly like you envision it when you first create it, like a design document for it. And so, because we're promising and talking about things so far in advance, we weren't delivering exactly what we promised. So, when we adopt a new policy, I mean, like we've been using this old policy for more than a decade. So it's going to produce ripples. It's going to feel weird and uncomfortable. But as we start to catch up and we start to be able to like promise something, and then in 2 weeks later, you see it delivered and playing a game, and you can kind of get in the habit and understand the cadence that we're using, I think it's a lot of those complaints are going to disappear.
Yeah. So you think it's a matter of give them time to understand that we're actually delivering on the stuff. It's coming in quick. We understand the game. There's not pie in the sky dreaming about things, and eventually the players will start to get accustomed to that and start to have like faith in your development process.
So there's that, but there's also our side of the problem, which is we start this and we don't have 10 things loaded up, and so we're now working on stuff. And so once we start to deliver and prove ourselves, then a lot of that, the side of that issue, which is not perception, but actual reality, our side, will be addressed as well.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so the Korean localization, how big a deal is that for you guys? Is it not just another localization, or is this an opportunity to really break open into a new market? Maybe that's not development, right?
You can.
I'm thinking it.
Answer that question, but
maybe
I'm not the guy to ask.
Okay, maybe I'll give that some. What I was thinking in terms of gameplay, though, is the amount of people that come in from the Korean market might play at a time when usually, because you have like kind of a like
time zone.
Yeah, time zone that goes kind of quiet, and a time zone that's usually full, and so it's going to fill up the time zone that's usually quiet. And is that going to like play into any of the plans that you guys have, and are you hopeful that that makes development for, I don't know, some of the time zone tanking issues and stuff? Does that even affect you guys?
I think anytime we add more players to the game, it gets more full, more content is created, more people to have fun with. I think the possibility exists that could help us sort of with some of our sovereignty problems, but that's not like a crutch that we intend to lean on. Like, we have issues with sovereignty. There'll always be issues with every system, and we need to examine them, pick them apart, come up with plans, and address them. Note that I'm not promising to do that in the next month. It's definitely not shipping anytime soon, but we do need to be thinking about these things and adding them to our backlog.
Yeah. All right, so from your perspective, tell us about what EVE Online is, what the players want, that kind of stuff. Like, do you have a handle on like what the game is? It seems to be very hard to describe to people, and I'm wondering if you have thought about it, since you come from a pen and paper background, as far as like a virtual world, as opposed to a Counter-Strike simulator, or is it a bunch of games combined?
So I'm not enough of a marketing animal to be able to describe EVE in like 3 words. I could describe Eve to you, but it would take an hour. If I was to sum up, I would say Eve is an extremely interesting mix of PvE and PvP that I've never seen before. If you take a look at a standard MMO model, I'm going to make numbers up here. These aren't real numbers. I'm pulling them off the top of my head. A standard MMO model, you're looking at like 80 to 85% PvE and like 15% PvP. And there's not a whole lot of crossover between those two segments of players. I mean, some people who PvP will also PvE and vice versa, obviously, but the two don't touch each other all that much. Eve is interesting and unique because it has a thriving PvE population and a thriving PvP population, which is much larger than most other games. But the thing that's very interesting, most interesting about it is that those two groups just like cross over all the time in really interesting ways. Almost everything touches PvP in some fashion, but you could also exist in Eve for a decade and never PvP if you wanted to.
We talked to some explorers who try not to PvP or trying to get by.
Trying not to PvP is PvPing. You are taking a look at another human being or multiple human beings and trying to think how they think and avoid stepping on their traps. Like, that is cool. That is itself playing with other players.
Yeah. What do you think of the economy in the game?
It is interesting because it is almost entirely player driven. I mean, we do have a few handles in it, but it's so wide open. One of the things that is always an interesting observation I like to make is that ISK, our in-game currency, is almost all of its use comes from trading with other players. We do take fees and so on and so forth, but 99% of what you're getting out of ISK is just buying and selling and trading things with other players, not really with us. We just get taxes and station fees.
A little here and there, but the money's moving around from player to player. Has that caused any problems, thinking in terms of the economy, the players safely generating income in deep space or outlaw space? That kind of what they've been able to do with their empire building, has that caused problems with the economy that you're aware of?
No, of course. Of course.
Slow pitch. Now hit it out of the park.
It's a sandbox game, so the history of Eve is forever going to be 20 designers in a room trying to outthink 250,000 people. And we will never do it. But we have the power to change the game in ways that they don't. And so what we do is they break the game, we adapt. They break the game, we adapt, et cetera, et cetera.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's basically how the game is going to function. That's how every MMO functions to a certain degree. Yeah. Although with the economy of Eve, it's a lot more true for us. So yes, absolutely, it's caused problems. We have adapted. We will continue to adapt. A big part of what we're doing recently is collecting data so that we can, in the future, adapt quicker and easier with less effort.
So have you worked on some tools to like make that possible? I heard a little bit of that from Rise, that you guys are making some tools or some ways of gathering metrics or analytics to make it quicker, to be able to adjust quicker.
So we've always had an analytics team, but we've recently been pumping resources into them. They have a little bit more headcount and better tools, and we're continuing to do that. That's not inside of my sphere of influence, but I rely on them, ask them a lot of questions, and overburden them, honestly. The other side of that question is tools teams. CCP currently has, I think, 3 tools teams, and we are asking them to up our tools and make it easier for designers to do things quicker and faster and so on and so forth. We're not 100% set on exactly what strategy we're going with the tools teams yet. It's a little still sort of in discussion. But yeah, we are committing to it, basically.
Have you reorganized teams? So this new Talos team that just came up, is there a different way of organizing teams yet, or are you still looking at how that should happen?
So we reorganize teams all the time. Most software development companies do. So when you take a look at a team, let's say a project comes up, we want to add a space village. We need to look at who's good at space and who's good at villages, and we need to build that team. And then those people were doing something else before, so they came off of another team. And so how do we plug those holes? Are we taking away some expertise that other team needs? Like, is now not the time to start this? So all of that sort of like Jenga puzzle is how you develop a game. So Rise's team spinning up right now is the right time because he is in a place where he could leave his previous team. And we've got the people to fill the hole on his previous team, and we've got the programmers to support him. And so this is the time to do it. It fits our goals. We gained a bunch of data from the Era of Chaos, and so we're going to hand that to him and see what we can do.
Yeah, let's talk about Era Chaos, and then we'll talk about new player experience, I guess. The Era Chaos, was that something that helped you guys understand certain reactions that you would get for doing certain things? Like, what did you learn from that?
Ooh, that's another question that I couldn't answer in an hour.
Okay.
But I can tell you we learned a lot from it. A lot of the common wisdom about what Age of Chaos would cause, and a lot of the common wisdom from what the players said it did do this is not correct. Some of it is. I mean, it's not like, but when you start to get into the numbers, it gave us a lot of interesting data. It told us who moved from high to null to low. It told us at what point people recover when we mix up the meta. How fast does a large corporation adapt to a meta change? How fast does a small corporation adapt? All kinds of data like that.
Wow. That's a lot of data.
Yeah.
Stuff that we wouldn't even thought about.
Yeah. Thank you to the CSM, because we sat down with the CSM and we said, please tell us what data you want to see. And like we had our own list, but they added quite a bit to our list.
That's what I saw. The very first thing was, I think you were in that first meeting, and you guys were comparing, it looks like analytics. Like they came with their numbers, and then you guys had some numbers. Mm-hmm. Was there a tornado of the differences? Was there a gulf between that caused a tornado because their numbers were so different than yours? Or were they painting essentially the same picture? Or can you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So that was a very interesting meeting. Before the meeting, we don't just talk to the CSM at the meetings. Like we'll communicate like via Slack or email. I was asked, like, can we make some of this, your early results of the Era of Chaos available to players? And my response was no, because it looks too good. And they were like, what? And I'm like, well, it's fantastic. If you just look at like a big brush, I mean, like our DAU went up, our money went up, everything went up, right? But we didn't go into this thinking that this was going to be some sort of magic bullet where we would just, woo, we're making a change and everything's going to get better. We went into this understanding that it would have downsides, and we needed the underlying data. And so we had to collect weeks and weeks and weeks of data to find out where the problems are, not because we didn't know there would be problems, but because we're looking for those problems so that when we do things in the future, we can eliminate them or minimize them so we can get the biggest bang with the smallest downside. And so the CSM brought in data, and they were like, this is our view of what's going on. And it didn't match our big view of what's going on because we have a broader picture than they do. But when we started to drill down into specifics, we could see the correlations. Like, this exists on your charts because of this on our chart. And everything sort of came.
That's fascinating. So both parts of the puzzle, but you guys were seeing actually good results from Blackout.
Yeah. We saw lots of good results from the Blackout.
That's interesting.
There also were bad results.
Okay, yeah.
We knew that, but it was not a crazy move on our part. Basically, one of the things that we need to do going forward is to shake up the meta a lot. Like, I don't mean that we need to shake up the meta once really big. I mean, we need to establish a cadence of keeping the meta shaken up so that the game always feels fresh and new. And this gives us a whole ton of data and a whole bunch of tools to start doing that in the future.
That's fantastic. So the new player experience, the other part of it, there's one part of it that is keeping, I'm talking about development here. One part of it is keeping experienced players off balance and shaking up the meta. This other part of it is, and it's a big part, the 80% part, new players and the funnel. What can you tell us about this, the new look at that?
Okay, well, earlier when we were talking about tools, a lot of effort is being spent on tools so that when we start working on new player stuff, we don't waste our effort. So what I'd like is we create tools to create missions faster, better, easier, higher quality, and then we don't lose that functionality. We can just, it acts as a force multiplier forever. So in the future, when we want to put out new missions, like say our focus changes to now we're, instead of new players, we're looking to target people with red hair. Well, now we still have those same tools. We just have to do some minor adjustments and we're good to go. A lot less time invested in it and we can just, get the ball rolling.
So how much does the invasions and the NPE and a lot of the, we call it artificial intelligence, I don't know if that's the right word, but basically the PvE experience play into attracting new players? Is that where you want to lay them off to, or?
So PvE is essential to attracting new players, but it's not the end all be all. You basically want to create a situation where the new player experience, if you think of it like a freeway, I'm
toll road, Autobahn, parkway.
So if you're not in America, it's a parkway. So a big road with multiple exits, and your goal isn't to tell the player what to do, it's to just force them to drive by the exits. Hey, this is where factional warfare is. Here's a little bit about it, but you can just go on if you don't want to. If you don't want to play with it, like, hey, this is some hardcore PvP in wormhole space, but you can just keep going if you don't want to. If you don't want to touch it, you want to just go raid. You want to just go rat. Okay, whatever. You set these things up and you teach them that they exist and show them where they are and teach them how to get to them, and then you let them make the decision. Numerically speaking, PvE is very important, but like I said earlier, PvE is equally or even slightly more important. And so we need to facilitate all these things.
Oh, that's very interesting. So for a long time, they've been saying, oh, EVE Online is a player-made content, emergent gameplay, and that sort of stuff. But you think that the environment plays a big role in also keeping players here.
Oh, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that PvP doesn't exist. So when I'm running a level 3 mission somewhere, assuming I'm not in Amar, the odds that I bump into another player is not zero, right? And even if that doesn't happen for weeks at a time, I'm still thinking about it. And it adjusts what I do and how I do it. And that is PvP, even if I don't actually shoot at a guy.
That's interesting. So it's almost like the psychology of PvP is the PvP, and the actual action of fighting is maybe the result of the thinking. So you're thinking about it on a different level. It's not just fighting and pew 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 with one another. It's also the avoiding getting killed and that sort of thing is also player versus player strategy, basically.
Yeah. So think of it like this: if you were in the army for a year, stationed overseas in a base, and you got in one fight for 20 minutes, you wouldn't say you'd been in the army for 20 minutes, right? Everything you did while you were in that base is about not getting shot, furthering the goals of whatever your army's doing, and preventing the goals of whatever your enemy is doing.
So last question, the meta of this game, is there anything else like it? And what do you want to comment about the meta gameplay that happens?
I mean, there's something that's very much like it, real life. I mean, make a corporation succeed.
Oh, there it is. Well, thanks very much. So we will see you next time on Targeting Stations.